Spirit, now in this space, move among us. May my words reflect your words, and the message we all hear be the message you would have us have this day. We pray in your Son's name. Amen. This morning's gospel is one of those rather weird ones in our tradition. Taking place in all three synoptic gospels is one we hear a lot, but it's also one that's rather, difficult to understand, which makes it the perfect text on this morning as we honor our veterans, because nothing says thank you to those who have served in our name than a text that makes everybody uncomfortable. That's a joke. In all seriousness, I thought hard about changing this week's text because it didn't feel like one at first that fit the day of celebration and remembrance, and it's an odd text that I wasn't sure what to preach on. But as I grappled with it a little bit, I began to think that it has something to say to us, even to those of us who are veterans, but all of us really, an important message that is worth hearing, even if we have to dig a little bit first to get there. So let's start digging. The story is one of Jesus teaching in the temple, one of his last days on earth. Lectionary, as always, is a little weird sometimes. Remember last week we were at Zacchaeus' house before Palm Sunday, and now we've skipped all the way to Holy Week. And Jesus is only a few days before the cross. The Sadducees ask him a question, and in response, Jesus seems to say that there will be no marriage in the age to come. Well, happy anniversary to you too, Jesus. Except, I don't think that's really what he's saying. That's not really the point he's trying to make. I'll forgive you if that's what you think the text is saying, because it's a pretty fair reading of the text. At first glance, it certainly feels like Jesus is describing the age to come as one without marriages. And speaking frankly, as a person who has a spouse, that makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to imagine an eternity where relationships like marriages are null and void. Thankfully, I don't think that's what Jesus is doing here. To begin with, please understand, it is not a good faith question he is grappling with. It is one asked in bad faith. The religious leaders of his day had been trying to trick Jesus all throughout these chapters of Luke. And in this passage, it is the Sadducees' turn. They ask a question about life after death. But the important thing here is they don't believe in life after death. Their question's not one of genuine curiosity or wondering, but a desperate attempt to force Jesus to say something that will make him unpopular. It's also, by the way, a question that totally misunderstands the marriage laws it's based upon. Those laws were made because widows in those era were in dire financial straits and financial vulnerability, and the remarrying wasn't so new relationships can be formed, but because children can be had of the marriage to take care of the widows so they didn't die. That's why the law is in place, not this convoluted thing the Sadducees come up with. Because, as I said, they're not asking a question in good faith. In some ways, it's not a surprise that Jesus responds to their bad faith question by not actually answering it. Because he doesn't. The Sadducees make up this convoluted case study, and Jesus simply ignores it and makes his own point. And that point is to affirm what the Sadducees don't believe, that there is indeed a life after death, even if we can't quite understand it. And this is the response he uses the marriage analogy for. here's the thing. Because he's responding to a bad faith question and just affirming life after death as the reality, I don't think he's actually trying to describe what life after death looks like. Instead, he's telling us that that age goes beyond our imagining, that we can't actually use the categories that we use now to describe what life looks like behind the veil. The Sadducees, trying to trick Jesus, invent this weird case study using the rules of this world, well, misusing the rules of this world. And Jesus simply refuses to play their game. He tells them in no uncertain terms that we simply can't use this world's terms and categories and rules when imagining the next. It doesn't work. It's not possible. And so he doesn't try to. This passage is not one against marriages, but about how hard it is to imagine what is to come. In fact, it seems to me Jesus only makes one concrete claim about the next life: that it will contain God, that God is the constant. As much as we don't know about what's on the other side of this life, we do know one thing, Jesus says: God is there. God is with us now and then. God is the God of the living and of those we think of as dead. God is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Jesus says. Not the God of those who once were, but the patriarchs that are still alive to God in ways that go beyond our imagining. Because death is not the end of the story. God is on the other side, there waiting, embracing, and knowing us, and still calling us beloved. God is there, Jesus says, the constant. This confusing, weird story is instead a reminder to us that death isn't the end of our story. That God is with us always in this life and in the world to come. And here's where I want to circle back into Veterans Day a little bit. I never served in the military, so I don't know completely what I'm talking about. But I listen well, and I have a pretty good imagination. And I imagine that those of you who have served overseas and in times of war might have had moments where feeling God's presence was hard. And probably also had moments where God's Spirit was all that sustained you. I imagine that those who served in peacetime or on the home front may have had moments where God's presence seemed far from you, and moments where the grace of God was all that kept you going. And I expect those who served once are now no longer serving the military still experience those kind of moments. Because those moments are human. They're part of something we all experience. They're part of what makes us human beings in this world. And friends, here's the good news. In all of those times, whether in battlefields on Europe, or jungles in Vietnam, or mountains in Korea, or a military base somewhere far from home, or a ship on an ocean, or other moments of service in war or peace, in all of them, God has been with you, and God is with you still. That's the promise found hidden beneath the oddness of this story. The promise of our faith. But all of us, those who have served and those who have not, have a God who goes with us in all moments of life. God keeps walking with us, just as God always has. If you don't believe me that this story tells that message, well, I want to point you to the stone back here from Psalm 91. Psalm 91 was the lectionary psalm about a month and a half ago. I wish it was today. It'd be awesome and cool if it was. But Psalm 91 reflects much what I've been saying about God's presence. And I want to read a small portion of that psalm for you. The psalmist writes these words: "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare, from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust." That's the promise. That's the gift. That God is our refuge and safe shelter. That God is the one in whom we can trust in all places of this life and of the life to come. That God, who is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, is our God as well, and keeps us always in the shelter of His arms, in the protection of God's hands. So this morning, veterans, I want to say to you, thank you. Thank you for your service, your dedication, and your presence this morning with us in this worship. But I also remind you and all of us about the God whose presence never leaves us. For God is here on this special Sunday. God will be there tomorrow on Veterans Day itself, the 101st anniversary of Armistice Day. And God will be with us, has been with us, all the days of our lives, on this side of the life to come, of eternity, and beyond. Thanks be to God. Amen. Before we sing our sermon hymn,